Hello and welcome to this David Icke Connector Videocast. And the subject this week has been a subject that's dominated much of the last week. We're all going to die from human-caused global warming. Or that's what we're told. And more important, that's what the kids are being told. And we've seen in the last week millions of children and young people going on school strikes to protest at what they believe, what they've been told, is that the world is going to end because of human-caused climate change. Now, I'm all in favor of kids having a day off school, having a day off from the incessant perception programming, which is what education really is, or passes for it. But the reason that it's happened is very, very dangerous to the future of those very children. It's just been not just sad, but sickening to watch images of young children in the prime of their childhood crying through the anxiety of fearing, in effect, the end of the world. And they've even come up with a psychological name for it now: eco-anxiety. And this was really personified by the performance of the Swedish 16-year-old Greta Thunberg at the United Nations this week. And it's very clear and obvious that what we have here is a gathering global religious cult. And like all cults, all religions, it's not based on fact, it's based on faith. It's based on belief. And so you see Greta Thunberg making her pronouncements, in effect terrifying the world's children into believing that the end is nigh. It ain't. And have you noticed that she's never questioned about the facts? She keeps saying, prompted by the adults that control her, of course, that we must believe the science. Why is she never questioned on the science? Why is she never questioned about ludicrous assertions that the science on climate change has been settled for 30 years? She goes on television programs and she's given softball interviews and not asked these questions because, well, you can't, press a 16-year-old, can you? And that's the whole idea. You do this through a child, and they will not be demanded to support what they say as an adult would. It's a total scam. And we must believe the science. Well, the word science comes from an old French word meaning knowledge or to know. And to know means surely to discover facts that allow you to know. What science, by that definition, does not mean is deciding what the facts are right at the start and then making the story to justify the facts fit what you want people to believe. That is not science. But what we have is not science. It's blatant, merciless indoctrination and programming of a belief system. Now, how do people come to their beliefs? From information received. And therefore, if you only hear one expression of information, then that's going to skew what you believe because it's all you've ever heard. Why do most Muslims come from Muslim families? Why do most followers of Judaism come from Jewish families? Why do most followers of Christianity, like in the southern states of America, come from Christian families? Because it's all they've ever heard. And because this death cult that I've been exposing for 30 years not only has control of the education, but set up the whole system from the start, they have control day after day after day of what children and young people are hearing. And so now generations have been programmed into believing in human-caused climate change and the coming Armageddon, because that is basically all they've ever heard. And then you look at some of the people that have been pushing this hoax, like Al Gore. Al bloody Gore, Vice President to Bill Clinton. You don't get that job unless you are a purveyor of mendacity. In other words, you know when Al Gore is lying because his bloody lips are moving. And he's the guy that's fronted all this up from the start, made a fortune, by the way, out of people believing in what he says, not least through carbon trading and all this stuff. So, Greta Thunberg says, look at the science. Well, let's look at a bit of the science that she will not have looked at. I've got just a few books here. Here's one. This one. It's by an academic who has specialized in climatology, Dr. Tim Ball. His book is called Human-Caused Global Warming, the Biggest Deception in History. Worth reading that, Greta. Next one. This, by Susan Crockford. Susan Crockford, again, is an academic, a zoologist, who has specialized in looking at the story, the global warming story, claims surrounding polar bears. And, well, there it is. The polar bear catastrophe that never happened. Polar bears' numbers are stable or rising. They are overwhelmingly thriving, she says. Here's another one by a meteorologist called Joe Bastardi, The Climate Chronicles. And what Joe does, he admits himself he's a weather nerd and has been since he was a kid, poring over weather records and stuff like that. And what he shows in this book is all these things that are currently blamed on human-caused climate change in terms of weather events have actually been happening all along, and there are certain cycles that cause them, nothing to do with global warming or carbon dioxide. Here's just one passage where he's saying this. First of all, major US dry periods. Oh, there's a drought, it's global warming. First of all, major US dry periods are a product of a cooling tropical Pacific. In the decades such as the 1950s through the 1970s, when the tropical Pacific is cooler overall, the US is drier than normal in much of the nation. It is exactly opposite in the years the Pacific warms, which, by the way, correlates nicely to an increase in global temperatures until the atmosphere adjusts to the warming tropical ocean and temperatures level off. But the idea that global warming causes drought here in the US is the opposite of the facts, he says. It's when the Pacific starts to cool and global temperatures start to drop that we see it dry out. When the tropical Pacific is predominantly cold, like it was in the 1950s through 1970s, as shown by the ENSO index, the US is very dry during the growing seasons. When warm, like it was from 1981 to 2005, it's wet. And he gives example after example of a series of weather dominoes, if you like. This happens, so that happens, and that follows. That shows that what is being blamed on global warming today are just normal weather patterns that can be tracked back decade after decade after decade. You ever read that, Greta? Has your mum ever told you? Oh, I thought not. And then we have this book by Mark Morano, Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, in which he charts, because he's been involved in the political side of this in America, he charts the political manipulation that's brought us to where we are. Because you've got politicians, the few, who actually know it's a scam, but it's politically expedient because of all the propaganda to go with it. And then you've got most of the politicians who are absolutely bloody clueless. I mean, I've met a number of politicians in my life, and I have been staggered at how little they know about anything. How do you become a politician? You get more people to vote for you than someone else. That's it. And most of these politicians are just believing the propaganda. We're all gonna die. We're not. And in this book, there's a few things on the back where he's saying the world is spending nearly $1 billion a day to prevent global warming. And why do so many scientists support this? Well, I'll tell you one reason. Because there is a trough of money which they can put their snouts in if they push the official line of human-caused climate change. And that trough is basically empty if you go against the official line. Do you think that might encourage people to parrot the propaganda? Scientists? Well, I think it might have an effect. A UN scientist has said the 97% consensus on global warming was pulled from thin air. I've got to come to that. Scientific organisations have come out for climate change consensus without polling their members. It's a scam! Climate policies are crushing the world's poor. Of course they are. The Paris Climate Accord would theoretically postpone global warming by 4 years and cost $100 trillion. Climate change has been blamed for prostitution and barroom brawls. You notice that? Oh, it's hot today, isn't it? That's global warming. Oh dear, it's a bit cold, isn't it? That's global warming. It's unbelievable. What are you doing, kids, believing this crap? One climate activist said we should protect our kids by not having them. Bright bloke. So what was that line I heard a few weeks ago? When we've deleted heterosexual people, future generations will thank us. Anyway, meanwhile, recent hottest year claims are based on statistically meaningless year-to-year differences. Major hurricane landfalls in the United States have declined over the past 140 years. F3 or larger tornadoes have been in decline since the 1970s. Antarctica is actually gaining ice. Carbon dioxide levels today are 10 times lower than in some past ice ages. Temperatures were higher than they are today 1,000 years ago. What caused that? Turbocharged handcarts? Turbocharged ploughs? Extraordinary. Anyway, it's like George Carlin, the late great American comedian, said about the American dream. He said they call it the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. And you have to be asleep to believe the nonsense that is indoctrinating and terrifying the world's children and taking away their childhoods for many of them because they're so terrified of what they're told is coming. So, what's it all about? Well, the one thing it's not about is the environment. It is about exploiting environmental fears, which you are stoking, to justify a transformation of global society, to centralize power on such a degree that you centrally dictate the fine detail of everybody's life. And if you go back, I've written about this extensively over the years. In the latter part of the 19th century, a secret society was created in Britain called the Round Table. It was funded by the Rothschilds. And the first head of it was a guy called Cecil Rhodes, who plundered southern Africa for the Rothschilds, the diamonds, the gold, etc. And it then started spawning, this Round Table, satellite groups to manipulate the secret society's agenda in different areas. For instance, in 1921, the Round Table created in the United States something called the Council on Foreign Relations, which has been driving to such a large extent American foreign policy ever since. It created the Bilderberg Group in 1954, which is an organization that gathers together people from different countries and different areas of society to push a common agenda. Another one's called the Trilateral Commission, also set up in America by the House of Rothschild, David Rockefeller, and a bloke called Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was an operative in this whole web of deceit, this global web of deceit. But crucial to the subject here today was that the secret society, the Round Table, created in 1968 a group called the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome was specifically set up to use the environment to justify the global transformation and centralization of power that this secret society and its offshoots demanded and are pursuing. And you look at the Club of Rome, we must protect the environment. Yeah, I agree, yeah. Where it's justified. So why was the Club of Rome set up by what we call today the 1%? Why was it set up by industrialists like a founder called Aurelio Pecci? Why was the guy who drove it on, Maurice Strong, Canadian, why was he a oil billionaire who fronted up the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit conference in 1992, which basically started this process really moving? Why? Because what this is all about is transforming human society, nationally and globally, into a Marxist tyranny. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Why would billionaires and the 1% want a Marxist tyranny? Well, because Marxism is not what we're told it is. Communism is not what we're told it is. You see, you've got capitalism, which is what we associate with the 1%. And what is that? Capitalism is to so concentrate wealth that you concentrate power. And through the concentration of wealth, you dictate choice, who has it and who doesn't. In other words, who has money and who doesn't dictates their choice, which is what? What is choice? It's freedom. It's the whole foundation of freedom. The more choice you have, the more freedom you have. And vice versa. And so that's the establishment. It's capitalism. But there's another form of central control where the few can dictate to the many. And it's called Marxism and communism and the don't scare the children version called socialism. And in that, you concentrate power in the hands of the few by creating a hierarchy of top-down control, as in the Soviet Union, as in China now, which allows the few to dictate to everyone else. The difference is you sell Marxism, communism, socialism as the opponent of capitalism and government of the people. And when you look at how Marxism works, the techniques of operation, techniques of transformation, it's looking to play groups off against each other, which is what's happening now with this identity politics. That's all classic Marxism. Create groups and then set them at war with each other and set those groups in totality against the rest of the population. But also what Marxism is looking for excuses to centralize power. And so if you want to centralize power globally, and that's what I've been pointing out for 30 years is what this is all about, then you need a global problem or the perception of one to which you can offer global centralized solutions. And what's better than the planet's going to die unless we centralize power and dictate the fine detail of your life? That is what it's all about. And you know who's going to get this in its most extreme form? The children currently demanding that to happen to save the world. It's a scam. When I've been pointing out all these years that global warming caused by humans was a hoax, the understandable question going way back was, well, why would they do that? Why would they hoax something like human-caused global warming? What's the point? Well, this is the point. I said at the time, this is a manufactured problem which they're going to offer a solution to, which will be the centralization of global power and control over every aspect of human life. And now, what are we seeing? We're seeing the Green New Deal in America being put out by the Democrats, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and those around her. Precisely the solution I said they would offer to the hoax of a problem. In Britain, we've got this Extinction Rebellion that are terrifying people into going out on the streets, stopping the traffic in London, etc., demanding changes take place to save the world from global warming. And what are those changes? Same as the Green New Deal. Centralized tyrannical control over every aspect of your life. That's where it's going. And so we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this New York congresswoman, saying that we have 12 years to save the planet. Of course, other predictions of how long we've had have been made in the past, and they've been passed, and funnily enough, we're still here. But no, we've got 12 years to save the world from global warming. What's that going to do to the kids? Eh? Ms. Ocasio-Cortez? Ever thought about that? But 12 years. 12 years takes us to around 2030, right? Funny that. Because there is a United Nations operation called Agenda 2030, which proposes to take over control of every aspect of human life to save the world from climate change overwhelmingly. And it's using that year again, 2030. Then you have people like the Google executive, Ray Kurzweil, who is pointing out that around the same year, 2030, humans will start to have their brains connected to artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence will then become the human mind. Is all this a coincidence? You must be joking. So, around 2030, kids today are going to be well moving into adulthood. And so you've got to get them first. You've got to get them indoctrinated by the time they become adults so that they will be putty in your hands. So you terrify them. You terrify them into demanding that they give their freedoms away, and everyone else gives their freedoms away. Have you noticed how these banners that some of these young people are holding are talking about, we're the ones that are going to face this, not you old people. Pull the older people away from the young. Create that divide. That's all part of this. And why do they want the young not to listen to older people? Because we've been around a lot longer. We've seen a lot of things that they're yet to see but will. And thus we must be silenced. And only the propaganda must be heard. And what you don't, of course, tell these young people is that carbon dioxide, CO2, is the gas of life. Without it, we'd all be dead. It's what vegetation, plants, trees feed off. And for goodness sake, don't emphasize the fact that 90% plus of so-called greenhouse gases are water vapor and clouds. What are we going to do? Ban condensation? CO2 is a tiny smear of greenhouse gases, and most of that CO2 is naturally generated. This is a quote from Professor Leslie Woodcock, Emeritus Professor, University of Manchester, Fellow of the Royal Society of Chemical Engineering, a recipient of the Max Planck Society Visiting Fellowship, and former NASA researcher. You listening, Greta? Oh, good. He says this: water is a much more powerful greenhouse gas, and there is 20 times more of it in our atmosphere, around 1% of the atmosphere, whereas CO2 is only 0.04%. Carbon dioxide, he says, has been made out to be some kind of toxic gas. But the truth is, it's the gas of life. We breathe it out, plants breathe it in, and it's not caused by us. Global warming is nonsense. And what do plants produce? When they take in carbon dioxide, they produce oxygen. You ever notice we need oxygen? But no. Oh, but no. 97% of climate scientists say that humans are causing climate change. It must be true, because that's all you bloody hear. Well, here's an article in the Wall Street Journal. The myth of the climate change 97%. What is the origin, it says, of the false belief, constantly repeated, that almost all scientists agree about global warming? The assertion that 97% of scientists believe that climate change is man-made, an urgent problem, is a fiction, it says. The so-called consensus comes from a handful of surveys and abstract counting exercises that have been contradicted by more reliable research. Another widely cited, it cites many instances of this, but it says here, another widely cited source of the consensus view is a 2009 article by Maggie Kendall Zimmerman, a student at the University of Illinois, and her master's thesis advisor, Peter Duran. It reported the results of a 2-question online survey of selected scientists. Mr. Duran and Ms. Zimmerman claimed 97% of climate scientists agree that global temperatures have risen and that humans are a significant contributing factor. The survey's questions don't reveal much of interest, it says. Most scientists who are skeptical of catastrophic global warming nevertheless would answer yes to both questions. The survey was silent on whether the human impact is large enough to constitute a problem, nor did it include solar scientists, space scientists, cosmologists, physicists, meteorologists, and astronomers, who are the scientists most likely to be aware of natural causes of climate change. The 97% figure in the Zimmerman-Doran survey represents the views, wait for blummin' this, represents the views of only 79 respondents who listed climate science as an area of expertise and said they published more than half of their recent peer-reviewed papers on climate change. 79 scientists of the 3,146 who responded to the survey does not a consensus make. Like I say, it mentions many others, but I'll just finish with this one. In 2013, John Cook, an Australia-based blogger, and some of his friends reviewed abstracts of peer-reviewed papers published from 1991 to 2011. Mr. Cook reported that 97% of those who stated a position, explicitly or implicitly, suggest that human activity is responsible for some warming. His findings were published in environmental research letters, but Mr. Cook's work was quickly debunked. In Science and Education in August 2013, for example, David Legates, a professor of geography at the University of Delaware and a former director of its Center for Climatic Research, and 3 co-authors, reviewed the same papers as did Mr. Cook, and found only, takes a breath, sits back, can't believe it, found only 41 papers, 0.3% of all 11,944 abstracts, or 1% of the 4,014 expressing an opinion, 1% and 0.3%, and not the 97.1% had been found to endorse the claim that human activity is causing most of the current warming. Elsewhere, it finishes, or I'll finish. Elsewhere, climate scientists whose research questions the alleged consensus protested that Mr. Cook ignored or misrepresented their work. And it's not difficult, is it, if you want to push a certain line? You quote the scientists, however few they may be, that are supporting that line, and you simply ignore those who are not. And on this basis, we are destroying childhoods through this eco-anxiety. People are not having children because they don't want to bring them in a world that's about to end. And we're seeing the transformation of global society on Marxist lines, increasingly, or demands for it, on the basis of this crap. And have you noticed, they never mention the sun. I don't know if you've noticed that when the sun comes out, it tends to get warmer. Have you noticed that? But the cycles of the sun, whether they're pounding out more or less energetic discharges, thus generating more heat, it's not talked about. And yet, here we have Bill Gates, a man I personally wouldn't trust to tell me the date in the calendar factory, who wants to spray the atmosphere to block out the sun. So you're saying the sun's something to do with the heat then? And of course, what he wants to spray has been called in the alternative media since the 1990s chemtrails. Now they're coming out and saying, well, yeah, chemtrails, it's a conspiracy theory. But now we're going to admit we're doing it, but we're going to give you an excuse for why we're doing it, which is saving the bloody world. So, Greta Thunberg. I feel sorry for her. I think she's being abused mercilessly. And isn't it funny that you're a kid in Sweden and almost overnight, it seems, you're talking to the 1% at the Davos summit, you're talking to the UN, you're in the media all over the world, pushing a line that this elite wants people to believe in. And you cross the Atlantic in a massive stunt in a yacht, which is connected to the Monaco royal family and to the House of Rothschild. And here's a story relating to some background to Greta Thunberg and those that control her, which is the real point. That's why you've got to feel sorry for the kid. George Soros is backing Greta Thunberg. Excuse me. Breathe, Dave. I'm so shocked. Are you shocked? Oh, dear, no. George Soros, who's funding these progressive groups pushing for Marxism all over the world, is backing Greta Thunberg? Who'd have thought it? Anyway, this is the story. Behind the world-famous 16-year-old climate activist, there is a liberal, last thing he is, oligarch, and a globalist movement. Greta Thunberg has become world-renowned because of her fight against climate change and lower temperatures on Earth. It all started in 2018 when she began a school strike on her own, standing outside the Swedish parliament with different placards trying to shape opinion and get young people to join. The Swedish media, mainstream media, quickly picked up her one-girl mission against climate change and wrote several articles about her. Soon enough, Thunberg met the Pope, spoke in front of the United Nations, and has even been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I wouldn't take that too seriously, Greta, because Obama got that, and so did Kissinger. The once lonely 15-year-old has become world famous, more or less overnight. Ooh, that's not contrived then, is it? When international mainstream media started reporting about her 15-day-long school strike, Greta Thunberg is now 16 years old and the daughter of famous opera singer and left liberal activist Marlena Ernman, who in the background has helped her daughter get started. You do surprise me. Thunberg soon also got her own coach, a well-known climate activist from Germany by the name of Louisa Marie Neubauer. What is the likelihood, the article asks, of a young girl who starts a school strike outside the Swedish parliament, getting school children from all over the world to join her cause and fight against climate change? And how often do 16-year-olds have their own coaches? Louisa Marie Neubauer, who has been captured on a numerous images and videos together with Greta, when the two direct climate change protests all over the world, belongs to an organization called the One Foundation. It has several well-known wealthy financiers, including Bono, don't start me, as well as Bill and Melinda Gates, staggered. And an even more striking name is that of the multi-millionaire oligarch George Soros, notorious for his currency speculation and maybe even more prominent as the father of the global radical left liberal brackets progressive, not liberal, lobby and activist network Open Society, supporting thousands of NGOs. The idea that Greta Thunberg just spontaneously started all this and everything that's happened since is just a coincidence is utterly insane. So what about this yacht that went across the Atlantic? Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg will sail across the Atlantic by boat to attend 2 climate conferences, but the teenager's carbon-neutral odyssey reveals the disregard, even contempt, absolutely contempt, the elite have for the rest of us. So this yacht, called the Militia 2, was captained by renowned yachtsman Boris Herman and Pierre Kaziragi, maybe that's right, I don't know, that's how it's spelled, grandson, I don't follow royalty, see, grandson of Monaco's late Prince Rainier III and actress Grace Kelly. The boat too was once named the Edmund de Rothschild, after the financial baron and founder of a fleet of racing yachts. Its construction cost upwards of €4 million. Us common folk, the article says, don't have access to vessels like the Militia 2. Thunberg's utopia, or in that utopia, we'd have to row. And even if we did, many of us can not take 2 weeks annual vacation just to get to America to see our friends, or hire actual Monaco royalty to get us there in one piece. The Rothschilds are, of course, involved in this. Of course they are. They were involved in the 1992 Earth Summit along with the Rockefellers and Maurice Strong. And of course one of the people that was very prominent in the global warming movement was David Mayer de Rothschild, who was the son of, or is the son of, Evelyn de Rothschild. And all this is just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. What I hope is that the speech by Greta Thunberg at the United Nations, which was so utterly over the top and quite disturbing to watch, personally, will get people to reevaluate how that kid is being used and to what end all this is really all about. But of course, whenever you want to promote propaganda, you can always rely on the celebrities. They'll step up and say whatever you bloody like. So here we have backlash at barefoot Prince Harry and hypocrite Green Arati. Eco-warrior elite who turned up at secret climate change Google camp. Google, absolutely massively central to this global manipulation. turned up to this secret climate change Google camp in 114 private jets, helicopters, and mega yachts. And it talks about they were mocked for leaving their own carbon footprint. It's like Al Gore. He's got a carbon footprint the size of Godzilla. A host of A-list celebrities faced an angry backlash today after they travelled to a climate change conference in Italy in a fleet of supercars, expensive yachts, and more than 100 private jets. Guests at the secretive Google camp were accused of hypocrisy. Really? After they gathered this week to discuss the environment while leaving a considerable carbon footprint of their own. Prince Harry is understood to have given a passionate, barefoot speech about saving the planet. And of course, when he'd finished in his barefoot speech, he put his shoes back on and trotted out to his private jet. And then you've got Leonardo DiCaprio, who flies to receive environmental awards in a private jet. Leonardo DiCaprio is a UN messenger of peace with special focus on climate change. Now, do you think DiCaprio has been selected for that role because he knows what he's talking about? Or because he's famous and therefore can be a vehicle for the propaganda? Let's have a look at this quote from a UN Secretary General. Mr. DiCaprio is a credible voice in the environmental movement. Can we debate that? But wait, and has a considerable platform to amplify its message. And that is what it is all about. Propaganda, indoctrination, especially of the young. So, I say to young people, you are being scammed. You are being spun. And you'll notice that this global warming, we're all gonna die movement overwhelmingly ignores China, the biggest polluter on the planet. India catching up very fast. But you see, you're not going to go for China as you go for the West, even though it's polluting most, because China is ultimately the model that this death cult wants to take the world into. A global, Marxist, centralized tyranny. And so the idea is not to target China, because that's what you want the world to be, basically. You want to target the West because that's what you want to turn into the equivalent of China. So it's all the West. We're all going to die because of the West. China? Oh, China, who are they? Never heard of them. And all these things connect, you see, because I was in the Green Party back in the 1980s. I'm bloody glad I was. I left it in the end when my life went in another direction. And I wasn't in the Green Party for that long. Somehow I ended up as a national speaker, God knows how. Circumstances, I suppose. But it was very good for me because it allowed me to see some of the mentality that is now manifesting in this global climate cult. And it's no surprise that the Green Party is in favour of stopping Brexit, nor that George Soros is funding organisations that want to stop Brexit. Because What is the European Union? It's the centralization of power. It's a form of Marxism in the process of becoming full-blown. Political correctness, where you get the population to silence itself. Identity politics, dividing America down the middle of I hate Trump, I love Trump. It's all part of this manipulation of human society, which this global warming hoax is central, to transform human society. So, young people of the world is not going to end, so chill. What is going to end if you keep buying this crap is your freedom. Time to wake up and fast.